Stop pulling that dandelion for just a moment. It may sound strange, but every time you pull one out of the ground, there is a good chance you are actually helping it spread. A few weeks later, the same spot often fills with even more weeds than before. What looked like progress slowly turns into a cycle that repeats every weekend. Many gardeners notice this without fully understanding why. The lawn gets thinner. New weeds appear faster. Small cracks in the patio suddenly fill with green growth again. It can feel like the garden is fighting back no matter how much effort goes into it. But here is the surprising part. Sometimes the problem is not the weeds themselves. Sometimes the problem is the constant battle against them. Years ago, my grandmother had a garden that always looked calm. Her flower bed stayed neat. Her pathways stayed clear. Even stubborn weeds slowly disappeared over time. Yet she almost never spent her weekends pulling weeds by hand. At first, this made no sense to me. Most people are taught that successful gardening means working harder. Pull more weeds. Dig deeper. Spray more often. But my grandmother did the opposite. She worked slowly. She observed carefully. And somehow her garden improved more every year. Today, science explains why her methods worked so well. In this video, we are going to look at 3 simple ways to manage weeds naturally without turning gardening into exhausting work. One method is for lawns. One is for garden beds. And one is for patios and walkway cracks. Everything is simple. Everything is gentle on the soil. And everything is safer for children, pets, birds, bees, and the helpful life already living in your garden. Some of these ideas may feel almost too easy at first. But by the end, you may start seeing weeds very differently. Before explaining why this happened, it helps to understand what weeds are actually trying to do. Most weeds are not attacking your garden. They are responding to opportunity. Bare soil, weak grass, disturbed ground, and open cracks all send signals that invite weeds to grow. Nature rarely likes empty space. When sunlight reaches exposed soil, something eventually fills it. This is why pulling weeds often creates more weeds later. When roots are pulled out, the soil becomes disturbed. Tiny buried seeds that have been sleeping underground suddenly receive light and air. Some of those seeds may have waited quietly for years. Once exposed, they begin to wake up. That is why a freshly weeded patch sometimes looks worse only weeks later. Dandelions are especially good at surviving this cycle. Their roots grow much deeper than most people expect. Even when the top of the plant is removed, small sections underground can survive and grow again. Many gardeners think they failed because they did not pull hard enough. But often the roots simply reached deeper than the tool could go. This is important because it changes the goal completely. Instead of trying to destroy every weed one by one, the better approach is to make the environment less welcoming for weeds in the first place. That idea alone can make gardening feel much calmer. Let us begin with the lawn. A healthy lawn has one powerful advantage over weeds. Shade. Most weed seeds need sunlight before they can sprout. If the soil surface stays shaded, many seeds never receive the signal to begin growing. This is why lawn height matters far more than many people realize. Short grass may look neat for a day or two, but it often creates the perfect conditions for weeds. Sunlight reaches the soil easily. The ground dries faster. Grass roots stay shallow. Weak grass leaves open spaces behind. Weeds notice those spaces immediately. Taller grass behaves differently. The blades lean over slightly and create natural shade across the surface below. Moisture stays in the soil longer. Grass roots grow deeper. The lawn slowly thickens on its own. This is why raising a mower blade can change an entire lawn over one season. Many gardeners cut their grass too short without realizing it. It is understandable. Short grass seems cleaner and easier at first. But over time, the lawn often becomes thinner and weaker. A mower height around 4 inches usually gives grass enough leaf surface to protect itself naturally. Different grasses respond differently depending on climate and rainfall, but in many areas, slightly taller lawns perform better during heat and dry weather. This becomes especially noticeable during summer. A short lawn often turns stressed and pale under strong sunlight. Taller grass usually stays greener longer because the roots remain cooler underground. There is another quiet benefit too. When grass clippings are left on the lawn, they slowly break down and return nutrients back into the soil. Many people bag clippings automatically, thinking the lawn will look cleaner without them. But thin layers of clippings disappear surprisingly fast and act almost like a gentle feeding. The lawn begins supporting itself. This does not mean weeds disappear overnight. Gardens rarely change instantly. But over time, healthy grass naturally leaves less room for weeds to take hold. And perhaps most importantly, this approach removes pressure from the gardener. There is no need to spend every weekend kneeling in the yard pulling tiny weeds one by one. The lawn slowly does more of the work itself. Now, many people turn to vinegar sprays when weeds appear. It feels natural and simple. And in some situations, vinegar can temporarily damage weed leaves. But there is an important detail many gardeners discover later. The roots often survive underground. The top growth dries out, giving the appearance of success. Then, a short time later, new leaves return from below the soil. This can become frustrating because it creates another repeating cycle. Spray. Wait. Regrowth. Spray again. Meanwhile, the lawn itself may become stressed if sprays contact surrounding grass. This is why strengthening the grass usually works better long-term than constantly attacking the weeds. Healthy lawns crowd weeds naturally. Now let us move to the garden beds, where my grandmother's method worked best. Garden beds are different from lawns because open soil is much more common there. Between vegetables, flowers, and shrubs, sunlight easily reaches the ground. That sunlight invites weed seeds to wake up. Most people respond by pulling weeds repeatedly throughout the season. But my grandmother rarely did that. Instead, she covered the soil. At the time, this seemed almost lazy. Cardboard boxes from the grocery store would appear in the garden. Leaves, mulch, and old plant material would pile on top. Very little digging happened. Very little pulling happened. Yet the bed stayed healthier every year. The reason is surprisingly simple. Weed seeds need light. Block the light, and many seeds remain dormant underground. Cardboard works especially well because it creates a temporary barrier while still allowing moisture and air to move through slowly. Earthworms continue working beneath it. Helpful fungi continue breaking down organic matter. Soil life remains active. Over time, the cardboard itself softens and becomes part of the soil. This creates a very different gardening experience. Instead of constantly removing weeds after they appear, you prevent many of them from sprouting in the first place. The process does not need to be complicated. Plain cardboard without glossy coatings usually works best. Tape and staples should be removed first. The sheets are placed directly over the weeds with slight overlap so sunlight cannot sneak through the gaps. Then comes the mulch. Mulch matters because it protects the cardboard, holds moisture, and improves the appearance of the bed. Wood chips, hardwood mulch, shredded leaves, pine needles, or composted yard material can all work depending on the climate and what is available locally. Dry regions may benefit from thicker mulch because it helps the soil stay cooler and retain water longer. Wet climates sometimes need slightly lighter layers to avoid trapping too much moisture around plant stems. Gardening always responds to local conditions. One important thing to remember is that mulch should usually stay a little away from the base of trees and shrubs. Constant moisture directly against bark can sometimes encourage rot. Small details like this often make gardening easier later. Now, some weeds are more persistent than others. Bindweed, for example, is famous for returning again and again. Many gardeners feel discouraged after fighting it for years. But even stubborn weeds weaken when they lose access to sunlight repeatedly. This is where patience becomes more important than force. If small shoots appear through mulch or along the edges, simply trimming them back at soil level often works better than aggressive digging. Every new shoot uses energy from the root below. If the leaves never stay long enough to recharge that energy, the root slowly weakens over time. It is not fast. But it is calm. And that calm approach often protects the soil structure far better than repeated digging. This matters because healthy soil is alive. Worms create tunnels. Fungi connect plant roots underground. Tiny organisms break down organic material constantly. Excessive disturbance interrupts many of these natural systems. The garden usually performs better when the soil stays relatively undisturbed. This is one reason no-dig gardening has become so popular among older gardeners. It reduces physical strain while improving soil slowly year after year. There is also something emotionally different about a mulched garden bed. Bare soil often creates anxiety because every tiny weed becomes visible immediately. Mulch softens the appearance of the garden. Small weeds become less noticeable. Moisture levels stay steadier. Watering becomes easier. The entire space feels quieter. And quiet gardens are often healthier gardens. Another gentle shift happens too. As chemical weed control disappears, beneficial insects often return in greater numbers. Bees begin visiting clover flowers. Butterflies stop along garden edges. Small birds search through mulch for insects. The garden starts behaving more like a balanced environment instead of a constantly controlled space. This does not mean perfection. There will still be weeds sometimes. Wind carries seeds. Birds drop seeds. Nature always moves. But the amount of work required usually becomes much smaller. That is the real goal. Not a perfectly empty garden. A manageable garden. Now let us move to patios and walkway cracks, where weeds create a different kind of frustration. Patio weeds are difficult because they grow in narrow spaces where tools barely fit. Pulling them often leaves roots behind. Sprays may drift onto nearby plants. And cracks tend to collect fresh seeds again after every rain. This is where heat becomes useful. Boiling water sounds almost too simple, but heat damages plant tissue very quickly. When poured carefully into cracks, it reaches below the surface where the roots are hiding. Small weeds often collapse within a day or two. Larger perennial weeds may need repeated treatments because deeper roots can survive the first application. But even then, the process remains simple and inexpensive. The main thing is safety. Boiling water should always be handled slowly and carefully. Closed shoes help protect feet. Children and pets should stay away until the area cools completely. Once cooled, however, there is no chemical residue left behind. That matters to many gardeners today. People increasingly want outdoor spaces where grandchildren can walk barefoot, where dogs can rest safely, and where bees can move freely without exposure to harsh sprays. Simple methods often support those goals surprisingly well. Still, boiling water alone does not stop future weeds from arriving. That is where polymeric sand becomes helpful. Many patios develop tiny empty spaces between stones over time. Wind blows in dust and seeds. Ants create tunnels underneath. Water slowly washes ordinary sand away. Weeds notice those openings immediately. Polymeric sand is designed to harden slightly after watering. It fills the joints more securely and makes it harder for seeds to settle inside. It also helps reduce movement between pavers, which can improve the overall stability of the patio. Applying it carefully usually gives the best results. Dry conditions help during installation because rain too early can interfere with the setting process. Different brands behave slightly differently, so reading the instructions slowly before starting is worthwhile. The nice thing is that this is not a weekly task. Once sealed properly, many patios remain cleaner for long periods with very little maintenance. Again, the goal is not endless work. The goal is reducing future work. That idea connects all three methods together. Healthy grass shades wheat seeds. Cardboard and mulch block sunlight naturally. Polymeric sand closes the spaces where weeds settle. None of these methods rely on constant fighting. They rely on changing conditions slowly so weeds struggle to establish themselves. This approach also changes how gardeners feel physically. Many older gardeners eventually notice that constant bending, kneeling, and pulling becomes harder on the body. Gardening should remain enjoyable, not punishing. Simpler systems often allow people to continue gardening comfortably for many more years. That may be one reason older gardeners often become calmer gardeners. Experience teaches them that nature rarely responds well to force alone. Observation matters more. Timing matters more. Patience matters more. Sometimes the best gardening decision is simply preventing tomorrow's problem instead of exhausting yourself fighting today's. And there is another hidden benefit people often notice. When lawns stay slightly taller, the soil usually dries out more slowly during summer heat. Watering may become less frequent. Mulched beds often hold moisture much longer after rainfall. Even patio cracks stay cleaner because the surface conditions become less inviting. The entire garden starts cooperating more naturally. This is also where costs quietly begin changing. Chemical weed products often seem inexpensive at first because each bottle costs only a little. But repeated purchases add up over months and years. New tools get purchased. Replacement sprays get added. More treatments become necessary. Meanwhile, cardboard is often free. Grass clippings are already available. Leaves fall naturally every season. Simple systems tend to build on themselves. Over time, many gardeners notice they are spending less money while doing less work. That combination surprises people. There is also something comforting about seeing nature respond gently instead of aggressively. Bees move through flowering clover. Worms appear under mulch. Soil becomes darker and softer over time. The garden begins feeling alive again instead of controlled. This is especially important because many people were taught that every weed is automatically bad. But some weeds reveal useful information. Dandelions, for example, often grow in compacted soil because their deep roots help break it open naturally. Clover sometimes appears where nitrogen levels are low because it can help improve the soil slowly. This does not mean allowing every weed to spread everywhere. But it does encourage a calmer perspective. The garden is always communicating. Sometimes weeds are symptoms more than enemies. And when the conditions improve, many weed problems quietly shrink on their own. That was the lesson my grandmother understood long before researchers explained the science behind it. She was not trying to dominate nature. She was guiding it gently. Her garden looked peaceful because the systems inside it were balanced. Soil stayed covered. Moisture stayed protected. Disturbance stayed minimal. The weeds eventually lost their advantage. Modern gardening often moves very fast. New sprays appear every season. New products promise instant results. But gardens rarely move at the speed of advertisements. Real gardens change slowly. And slow changes often last longer. If you are beginning these methods for the first time, it helps to stay patient during the transition. A lawn may take one full season to thicken noticeably. Mulched beds improve gradually as soil organisms increase below the surface. Patio cracks may need a second treatment before stubborn weeds finally stop returning. That is normal. Gardening is rarely about instant perfection. It is usually about small steady improvements. And small improvements matter. A slightly healthier lawn becomes easier to maintain next year. A mulched bed needs less watering during summer. A sealed patio stays cleaner after rain. Each small improvement reduces future effort. That is what makes gardening feel lighter over time. If you're comfortable sharing, I'm curious which area gives you the most trouble right now. Is it the lawn, the flower beds, or the cracks along the patio? Many gardeners struggle with one area more than the others, and sometimes simply talking about it helps people realize they are not alone. The important thing to remember is this. Weeds are persistent because nature is persistent. But persistence works both ways. Gentle habits repeated over time often outperform harsh treatments repeated in frustration. A taller lawn. A layer of mulch. A sealed crack between stones. Small actions. Quiet actions. But together they slowly reshape the garden. And perhaps that is the most comforting part of all. You do not need to spend every weekend fighting your yard to have a beautiful outdoor space. You do not need to spray everything or dig constantly or exhaust your body chasing perfection. Sometimes the garden improves when we simply step back and observe.